meet you. Yeah, some food, some snacks, there's a lot of wine, so feel free to indulge. A few of these people are mostly doctors around here as well. And so I found that a lot of doctors don't necessarily have the financial literacy. Most Black professionals, period, don't have the financial literacy necessary to achieve generational wealth. And so I'm trying to plug that gap and just do it through free talks every month, just pick my brain. I've been on the other side and I've literally drafted documents for this type of stuff and educated billionaires and billion-dollar companies. So why not do it for us? So usually just it's super informal, just hanging out and so ask a lot of questions. I'm millennial, not Generation Z. 7?
Yeah, we shall. All right, well, thank you guys for coming so much. Most of you guys know me. For those that don't, my name is Shawnee Smith. I'm a physician, and this is my wonderful partner, DK Smith. No relation, but cousins in love. Who's a wonderful attorney. And what we wanted to do, just based off of a lot of the feedback we got from our introductory meeting on May, was really to find topics each month, things that will continue to build on each other so that at the end of the day, we keep wealth within our own communities and then we learn how to build wealth. And so the first thing that we need to start out with that I feel like most people, especially those of us that are in the medical field, I feel like we understand risk clinically when it comes to certain treatment plans, certain surgeries, regimens. We have no idea about financial risk. And because most of us are the first generation within our families to have a six-figure income, some of us, or to have a high six-figure income, you become very worried about what that risk means. And so then you tell people I'm aggressive, and then you tell people, no, I'm moderate, and then you tell people, no, I'm low risk, and then you're low risk and your money's not growing, and so you're not creating any wealth. And so that's what we kind of wanted to talk about first, and we had an amazing anecdotal story that I think will really put risk in perspective. And Harry, I'm gonna give you the floor to talk about it.
Wow.
You can just do a quick presentation.
Okay.
And then as you present, I'll pass around the picture.
Awesome. So my name is Harry. I'm a state licensed building inspector.
And so I figured it's a great way to segue into risk, because if you look at most of us have other careers outside of whatever businesses we could be looking to enter into. And so it then becomes your job to understand really what are the risks that you are taking on and who are you allowing to work with you in those risks. And have you vetted them appropriately, and have they vetted various industries that are supposed to be working with you in your business ventures? This man is what, a millionaire?
Safe to say.
Okay. He's a millionaire, he's got money, he's a smart guy, he's done very well for himself. Why would he not be aware that there is someone who is misrepresenting his business? So that's our anecdote.
And that sort of brings us into the topic of risk broadly, but more specifically, organizational risk versus individual risk. We're going to analyze each one of our own risk profiles, right? What it means to be aggressive, what it means to be conservative, right? And does everyone know what that means? Does anyone know what that means?
We're amongst friends.
Yeah, everyone can.
And we want to loosen up.
It's just interactive, so right? Because an aggressive 60-year-old is way different than an aggressive 20-year-old. Right? Or at least they should be on paper, right? And so,
in theory.
So I want to talk about and explain the differences, right? And so when you construct your portfolio, when you're talking to your financial advisors, so you understand, I want an aggressive portfolio, right? What does that mean? All right, and what exactly does that mean when they say, okay, I want 75% of my money to go into stocks or 80% to go into bonds? Okay, there are different types of bonds, there are different types of stocks. Different stocks have different risk profiles. What does that mean? All right, and so just kind of one to make to make sure everyone has that vocabulary and they understand what it means, so you all can leave this room and have an intelligent conversation with any financial advisor, with any any friend or anyone trying to manage your wealth besides you, right? And even for yourself, so you can know, hey, okay, now I know the difference between a corporate bond and a municipal bond, or I know the difference between a large cap or small cap stock, right? And the varying risk profiles, right? And what that means. And if you're 25, how you should be, maybe you want to be a little aggressive. And what that means is you have more stocks in your portfolio versus bonds, right? If you're 60, like, I should probably have a little more bonds in my portfolio. But then even taking it a step further, like back, what does that mean holistically? Because now we're not talking about just the stock market, we're talking about real estate, right? We're talking about investing in friends' businesses. We're talking about personal investments, right? And what does that mean on paper for everyone? So it's kind of the overview for today. And and so I guess we have a small group and go around the room and we can introduce themselves. Dr. Nee, you want to start? Put you on the spot.
Hi, I'm Dr. Renee. What are we supposed to say? You said that. You went to Michigan State. I sure did. I'm green and white.
Tell us a little bit about your brand and your business.
Okay, so my brand is Ask Dr. Renee. I have a show to 45,000 doctors' offices across the country and Walgreens.
Nice, congrats.
Very random. I was standing in the Walgreens in the exact same outfit. So. But the show's called Out of Office with Dr. Renee. I sit down with the doctor and they're little 2-3 minute episodes to help the patients. I do print, I do radio, I do online media as well.
I'm an anesthesiologist at Rush. I'm a leasing agent here in the South Loop.
I'm Harry, again, home inspector. Previous background in construction management.
My name is Angela. I'm internal medicine and sports medicine doctor with the internal medicine doctor at UAC.
I work in partnerships and digital media, large tech company.
And then introduce myself?
Well,
okay. Nope, I'm DK, everyone. I think everyone knows. For those who don't know, I'm an attorney, worked on Wall Street for a little bit, worked most recently at BCG, Boston Consulting Group. We did management consulting for growth strategy firms, helped out a couple billion-dollar businesses, helped them grow, helped them with their M&A strategy, and most recently left there to start my own impact advisory firm, and now I help underserved businesses, nonprofits, startups, and influencers grow their brands, grow their businesses through growth strategy advisory and legal advisory. So that's what I do now.
I said my name earlier. I'm trained and certified in internal medicine and critical care. I work as an independent contractor. I'm licensed in about 6 different states. Primarily, currently I'm in Idaho, here in Illinois, and Wisconsin. And that's me, and DK and I met, and we felt like we needed to help people be better. And so that's why we decided to do this.
Yeah. Oh. All right, so who wants to be the brave volunteer and tell us, what they consider a balanced stock portfolio? And what do you consider that? And there's no right or wrong. Well, there's a wrong answer, but there's multiple right answers.
One that matches your risk tolerance.
Okay.
For the time.
Okay, that's a great answer. Yeah, good answer. All right. which begs the question: What is risk tolerance?
I have a more basic question, just to make sure. Does everyone understand what a portfolio is? I feel like for a lot of us in the room, it's like for so long, and then you get out and someone says, "You need to make a portfolio." I'm like a folder. I can't really put like a one with my name on it. Does that work? Like, no. Anybody?
I don't know. I just think like mutual funds or like different collections of things like that. I don't know.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
What else wants to add to that?
It's okay. I promise. We've given you wine and appetite.
Different investments maybe that you're making.
Yep. So that's all correct, right? So your portfolio consists of any assets that you own, basically, right? And you really want to tailor those assets. So one, you want one firm to handle your real estate, one firm to really handle your stocks and portfolios, right? And then you may want to handle the investments you have with your brother's new startup or something you want to invest in, right? So that's all included into your portfolio, and hopefully it's generating cash flow, right? Or at least some kind of passive income or paper gains, something, right?
And also
Hopefully.
understand these can't be like depreciating assets.
Right.
Like if I have a Honda Camry, or no, Toyota Camry.
Camry.
So- if I have a Camry, but if I have a Camry, that Camry doesn't count as
It's
an
not really-
asset.
doesn't go in your
Or
portfolio.
if I have a property that I'm losing money on,
Mm-hmm.
it does not count as an asset. So you can say, oh, I own 10 properties in Chicago. And it's like, that's great. Are they helping you or hurting you? Because if they're hurting you, they don't count.
So to add to that, it depends. It's ideally you want a situation where your properties are gaining cash flow and appreciating in value, right? And those would be considered assets in your portfolio. But there are some nuances to that. Some people hold assets just to write off the losses for their other gains, right? So let's just say you had a really good year stock market, but maybe your housing unit isn't doing so well, and you have losses there, and you can kind of write those, like kind of balance it off. So there are reasons why people hold
Hold
revenue
potential
losing
losses.
assets, but by and large, generally, you want it to be cash flow producing or something that's going to at least appreciate in value over the long term. And then we sort of can talk about the difference between trading versus investing, right? And how trading is more of a short-term ordeal versus investing is a longer-term strategy you need, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, and so on, and building generational wealth. Because in theory, I think Warren Buffett is really big on this. Any stock you buy, you should never sell it, period, ever. That's because you think about if you bought Coca-Cola in the 1950s. Right, for 5 cents, and now you kept buying it every month. You put $100 every month and bought that, and you would be worth hundreds of millions right now, probably, right? And so, would you want to sell that? Probably not, because you can do something called borrowing against your portfolio, which is you go now to a bank and say, hey, I have $100 million worth of stock. If you sell it now, you have to pay taxes on that. But now you can just go borrow money against the bank. And the bank can hold that in an escrow account, and they can give you money where now you don't pay taxes on the money you borrow. You actually pay taxes against the interest, so it goes down, lowers your tax burden. And that's kind of the trick people play with. That's when they say never sell. Yeah. Yeah. Let me slow down. Yeah.
But it's a way that it makes you more financially stable and wealth building, so to speak.
Right.
It's like there was an older gentleman that I spoke to who told me that he was leaving his wife, and this was, I think, in the 70s, okay? And that was around the time when Merrill Lynch had first came out. They had a ton of shares. He just gave them all up in the divorce. He's like, you take them. Now think about, it's 2019 right now. He's still alive. So from a financial perspective, where do you think he would have been if he understood the value of those stocks at that time?
Right.
I mean, it's not like it was a long time. It's like, 30 years later?
Yeah. It's important to know, everyone always says, cash is king, cash. But really, cash is a depreciating asset. It's not really, because you lose to inflation every year. Inflation is, on average, appreciates 2% every single year. So if that cash is sitting there, you can have $1 million, but you're losing value on that cash. So ideally, you want to be putting that cash to work. And now the question is, and this is where we get into risk profiles and risk tolerance, is how do you make that cash work for you in a way that matches your risk profile? All right. So now, okay, we can invest all of our $1 million into something called T-bills, which are treasury bills, which the government issued. T-bills are usually 10-year notes, and they yield about, on average, 2%, right? So cool, so you can invest there, but remember I told you that inflation is 2%, so if you invest in the assets that's appreciating 2%, you're appreciating just at the rate of inflation, so you're not really making any money, all right? Or you can bet that $1 million and you can go to Vegas and, you know, put it all away and you can appreciate real quick. Or you can like risk, you know, lose it all, right? And those are your two ends of the spectrum for risk. Right? So ideally you want to be somewhere in between that, right? I mean, you don't want to be too heavily to the right, but you also don't want to be too heavy to the left, right? Because then you're losing out on money. And so now it's all about taking calculated risk, all right? And making sure that, hey, how much risk can you actually stomach? Like, can you stomach the stock market? It's a real thing. When times are good, yeah, everyone's riding the waves, you know, but then when times go bad, 2008 happened, everybody sold, right? Which in theory, that was the opposite thing to do, because, you know, we're all taught to buy low, sell high, right? But if you're panicking and your emotions start to get involved, you know, when you see your stock start to go down towards zero, you panic and you sell low. And so therefore it's backwards. You bought high, sold low, and so now, you know. And what I just say about like appreciating assets, right? You're not really gaining anything. You know, now you have cash. Okay, now I'm safe of cash. Okay, but now if you would just wrote it out, we're at record highs. I think every week we've been on a record high the last 3 or 4 weeks in the stock market. So, you know.
But I'll give you a good example. So a lot of people have been investing in various cannabis stocks. Because when you look at it in various states, cannabis is now legal. So people are like, oh, I'm going to invest in this company that does this in cannabis. I'm going to invest in this company. Now, some people are starting to freak out because some of the more popular cannabis companies, their stock price is dropping. So if they were $20, $30, or $40 a share, there are some that are $2.50 a share now, $3 a share. So some people would get freaked out, because there are people who look at those stocks and like watch every move they make. It's like, oh, I need to take my money out, I'm losing money. Well, not really. Yes, the stock value has gone down, but this may be the time for you to actually buy more.
Right, potentially.
And I'm just using cannabis as an example because that's kind of like the hot topic now that everyone's been talking about in finance over the past few years. But that's an example. It's like some of these companies, like there's a company called GW Pharmaceuticals. So they specialize in trying to make medicines for, like, with cannabis origins to be treated for different things. So there was a drug they put out, and I think they were like on CNN about it, because it's used to treat people who have seizures, but seizures related to a specific genetic abnormality. So it's a very specific case, but these particular patients have like seizures that won't stop. And we all know it's bad for your brain if you keep seizing. Like everyone, like it's not good. It's not a good place to be in. So it basically becomes a thing where this company's, their stock value is dropped. Well, do you take money out, or do you leave money in an industry that, if you look at it from an overall perspective, certain states are continuing to legalize, certain countries are continuing to legalize nationally, and there may be more research that is beneficial towards that. So just because the stock price drops doesn't necessarily mean that you need to pull out, if that makes any sense, because I know we're talking about a lot of stuff. And I didn't know about any of this when I first came out of fellowship.
Yes, please, interrupt.
As a physician, investing in pharmaceutical stuff, that's ethically just not appropriate, right?
Oh no, it's totally fine.
Is it?
You can invest in whatever you want. The question is, do I work for the company that I'm invested in? And a lot of times if you work for the company, then if that company has private versus public shares, most of their employees are allowed to have some of the shares just because they are employed by that company. It's almost like a gift that the company gives them. But yeah, we have no barriers.
No,
I've invested in
ain't
Striker.
nobody coming and trying to take my life.
I invested in Striker.
Like, I ain't playing with y'all.
So legally, you cannot invest using something called MNPI. It's material non-public information.
I'm going to run downstairs and get beer.
Okay. And so you can't. So what that means, the MNPI is information. So let's say you work at Stryker, right? And you know right, exactly. You know they're working on something and they're going to launch and it's going to be huge and they got all these government contracts and you say, oh, I'm going to go buy Stryker stuff. No, because.
So if I go to a conference and they're talking about, and there's somebody that's presenting and talking about how they're working on something.
Right.
Then I go in.
But is a conference public?
It's public.
So you can, because now it's public, so it's not non-public. Yeah. So and anything that becomes public, you can now like trade on it. The whole theory and rationale behind that rule is they don't want anyone to have an unfair advantage.
Right.
Now we know that's kind of
Tax code
that's in the insider trading laws.
Inside trading.
Insider trading, insider trading laws, yeah.
That's the expert. He's
Insider trading, yeah.
Write it down.
Yeah. So you don't want to do that, but that can get real complicated really quickly. But I mean, I'm happy to talk offline to dive more into it, because a lot of things like if you told me that Stryker was like making some move and you worked there, and I just happen to hear it, and I go trade on it, I may or may not get in trouble for that, because you have to have some kind of financial gain like yourself. Then okay. But if I'm in a coffee shop or you're in a coffee shop and you hear someone works for Facebook and Facebook is like, and you're hustling, right? And so and you're like, Facebook's we're going to do spin off Instagram next month, and I can't believe this, I'm getting fired. And you're like, so then you trade on that, you're fine. You're fine, because it was out in the public and you heard it, and he's overheard it, right?
If
Now
a pharmaceutical rep comes to your clinic though and is talking about, we're working on blah blah blah, or you go to I've gone to a pharmaceutical dinner, blah blah blah. That okay.
Like a dinner, I mean, like it depends on the facts, right? Like if it's a dinner and it's kind of like, hey, you don't have to sign an NDA for it to be enforceable. You can verbalize an NDA. Like if it's like known that, hey, we're talking in confidence, then you probably can't trade on that. But if it's kind of like someone's drunk and like babbling and stuff, and maybe, but you still will get that knock by the SEC. Like, so I noticed you had a particularly good timing for this trade. No activity, but all of a sudden you spent $20,000 and bought this a month before the merger, and then they will look at all your information. Then you have to prove that this was legitimate, and I just overheard a coffee shop. I don't know anyone who works there, and you will probably win based on that, but you will get that call and that knock.
That's with mergers.
With any kind of information, exactly. Information. What's going on, man? And so what Shawnee was talking about earlier, investing in like a medical marijuana stock, or we call it a small cap stock. Thank you. That would be considered something very risky. And when you're balancing your portfolio, you want to have like as little of that, not as possible, but a small percentage of that. So we call it having exposure. So you want to be exposed to that, but a very small amount. So for example, if you have a portfolio and 10% is in quote unquote alternatives, like alternative investments would be like a startup, or a super small cap, or private equity investment, or your brother's company, then you want to limit that, but then you want to limit even subdivide within that sector, right? Within that 10%, you want maybe 2% to be in small cap, 2% to be in a tech startup, 2% to be in private equity, and that's kind of your risk tolerance. I would say that's kind of fair. Everyone in the room should be exposed 5 to 20 on the high end percent in alternatives, right? Because we can capitalize and benefit on the upside, and we can withstand the downside, because Lord willing, we'll be living, at least long enough to ride out another few recessions, and we can actually, if everything goes, that 20% goes to zero, you have enough time to like recoup that investment through other prudent investment activities. So it's really like, you can't look at the stock market like at a particular day or a particular time. I mean, you have to look at it holistically and where you're growing, because as you know, it moves like this, right? And hopefully it's moving up. All right, and then, so in theory, the more calculated risk you take, the higher your returns will be. But the key word is calculated risk, all right? And that depends on a lot of due diligence, and this kind of brings us into the organizational risk versus individual risk, right? Now, let's say a real estate company, or a real estate investment trust. and they have 1,000 properties in every state, right? That wouldn't happen. The rich crack baby wouldn't happen, right, at all.
Right.
Because they have processes in place and controls in place to prevent that from happening. And that's because they understand the difference between the risks. So they really investigate and do their homework, and we call that due diligence. They do their due diligence on different companies, whatever they're investing in, they dive into it, right? And I mean, I was part of the team. I would be reading literally thousands of pages a day on, looking for the crack baby, trying to find, okay, no crack babies here, and so, but they spend a lot of money making sure that their assets are protected, because the thing about risk management, you want to protect your principal no matter what. Like that's really the thing. You don't want to gamble. You don't want to gamble. You want to invest, right? And that means protecting your principal and understanding your risk profile and how much you can stomach when the principal does go. Maybe it goes down a little bit, dips a little bit, but it's going to go back up. If you are smart and you've done your homework and your due diligence. And many individuals, especially us people of color, we don't really know how to do that. We don't know. If I told you to invest in a cannabis startup, and the first question you should ask is, okay, where's your 10K? Are they public? And then you probably ask, what's the 10K? Right? And then annual report. And then if I give you a 100-page annual report, chances are you probably don't know what to do with that. You're like, okay, cool. Like it has some risk on it. It has some numbers and something called a balance sheet. All right, what does that mean? All right, and it's good to say, oh yeah, we're skyrocketing growth. We're anticipating 200% growth year over year for the next 20 years. Okay, but like you're bleeding cash. Why? All right, and so then you would have to go into the annual report, read that, which is a lot of work. So
you get that annual report. I think about it. It's like I think what was it 3 years ago? Like I invested in a startup.
Yep.
But I wasn't dropping 10 grand down for the startup.
Yeah,
they already had those big billion-dollar investors. So I got my little share. I like my little share.
Yeah.
But I did that. But at the same time, I had a very good idea of who was investing, how much they had invested, where they were going. So then if someone comes to someone from a startup, what are like the top 5 things that they need to look at to know off top, this is what I need to know. This is what I need to ignore. This is what I should invest in.
All right, so is the startup publicly traded or not?
Yes.
Yes. So the first thing you need to do is Google search them. Like literally Google to 3 pages back and see, okay, is there any negative news, any negative press, right?
Like I did for Rich Baby.
So, which brings us to point number 1, Google to look for any negativity, any bad news, any losses, any potential things, because you want to understand the risk of this. If I invest $10,000 in a startup, what's the chance of me losing it all versus me, gaining another 100,000? Like, what is that, right? And so you want to look at any potential losses, what they've gone through in the past. Number 2, you probably want to investigate the founders.
Okay.
Right? So you want to look at the founders and say, okay, what have they done in the past? Who are they? Are they the corporate types, or are they just kind of like, starting up, just doing it just because they want to do it? Are they somebody that, daddy handed them a bunch of money to go do stuff? And exactly. Exactly. It's just good marketing, just because they have, Instagram models doesn't mean that you should invest.
Power brings all the money.
Correct. So you definitely take a look at the founders, who they are, their track record. Is it all a facade? Is it kind of just showy, right? You're going to want to ask questions about their numbers, but let me give you some specifics to ask about their numbers. So you're going to want to know percentage growth, right? Like how much they've grown in the past, or they anticipate growing, and how, right? And then you want to know, this gets a little technical, so you want to know how are they investing this money, right? And that's called CapEx, capital expenditures. So typically for a startup, it's like a baby. It has to grow, but in order for it to grow, it needs food, and the food is cash. So you want to know, is this food organic, or are you feeding my baby Cheetos? Right. So you want to know, so where's this food actually going? And so if they can't articulate that to you clearly and concisely, it's probably a bad investment. All right. Number 4, you want to look at your co-investors, like you did. Who else is involved? But you have to be careful with that because you can be subject to some sort of like what kind of bias is it called? I think it's a psychological term. It's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. Yeah. So you can be subject to confirmation bias because if Google's investing in it and Apple's investing in it, and it has to be a good thing. No. There's a company called Theranos. I think everyone heard about Theranos? Yes, everyone doesn't know about that. Theranos. Yeah. Theranos.
That was that little blonde chick, right?
Yeah. The blonde brunette, oh my God. Forbes is the youngest billionaire, and she this, and turns out the whole thing was a fraud. Yeah, and I think people invested literally $800 million in cash. Yeah, and lost it all.
So that is the
Right.
best
Yeah, the
example.
possible,
Empire
yeah.
Festival are probably like your two best examples of confirmation bias
Yep.
that have become mainstream.
Yep. And then, so after you look at the co-founders, number 5, what you want to do is probably look within your own portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, you didn't invest $100,000, you invest probably a couple grand, 10 grand, whatever, because you understand that 10% of alternative investments and only 2% of that is going to be comprised of this. Right. Right? So you want to look internally to how your portfolio is balanced, and then take everything you know and assess, okay, if I drop this $10,000, will I be prepared to lose it all and never see it again? Because investing in a startup is one of the most riskiest things you can probably do, besides going to Vegas.
There was no 10,000.
So yes, anything that says, you invest now, you can make 100x or whatever, maybe, but there's also 1,000 of those every single day that are pitching for the same dollar you're trying to give.
Exactly.
And there's realistically only going to be 5 to 10 of them going to hit, like less than 1%. So, you're going to bet on a horse. You're kind of gambling at that point because you don't know, right? And so that's why it's important to do your due diligence, your homework on the founders, your co-investors, the internal operations, the capital expenditures, where all that food is going, and how are they feeding this baby. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what you would look at if anyone approaches you. And then if there's typos in the PPM, just that should be a red flag.
So who starts out?
I have a question.
I know that's very
How do you bring
technical.
this information? You're like emailing somebody? Like, I need to see your annual report.
Yeah,
So if they come up and ask you.
Yeah. So if it's publicly traded, there are annual reports, something called a 10K, which is an annual report. There's a 10Q, which is a quarterly report, where you can see all their numbers. It's tough because this is a whole different, this is a class about reading balance sheets and income statements and understanding and analyzing risk and, accounts receivable, if that's too. This is.
Some of this will be, if it's a publicly traded
It will
company,
be. It has to be.
will be
Yeah.
on their website. If
Yeah.
it's private, that's a whole nother animal.
If-
And that's if they are coming up to you and asking you to invest financially in their startup, they have to provide that information
Yep.
to you.
Yep.
Like that's a
Yep.
stipulation of your investment.
Yep.
So
Yep.
startups are a very small portion
Sliver, small,
of your
very small.
portfolio. Like mine
Yeah.
is like 2%, maybe less than that.
Yeah.
It is like a small little dot on the floor. It is that
Yep.
piece of chip that's on the floor. That is my startup.
Right. Because if it does well, great. But if it doesn't, you don't lose sleep.
I won't lose sleep about it. Right.
And if it's private, a private startup or a small startup that's not public yet, or any small private company, they typically have a PPM, it's a private placement memorandum, and that would usually list where your money's going, how it's being spent, what are the risks involved, and typically you would probably sign an NDA because they don't want it being public, and that's that's another way to access this information, just analyzing the risk and understanding the numbers. And I mean, honestly, the best way is if you talk to someone and they have a clear, articulate path of how they're going to spend every dollar that's being invested. Like if someone asks me, okay, I'm looking for $500,000, I'm like, all right, well, where's the first $10,000 going? If they can't come up with an answer like that, then you should raise a red flag, right? Because if they don't have a plan for that money, then they're just going to, then they're just kind of just throwing money hoping it sticks. But you need to be organized. You need a strategy. You need a plan. You need, monthly check-ins. It should be a lot involved, when you invest in something like that. And so typically, the more organized someone is, the more plan they have, then you can kind of assess that risk a little bit better. Meaning, versus someone who's disorganized, and there's really no way to assess that kind of risk, and so you should leave it alone.
Run far away.
Yeah. Not to say that you can't succeed if you are disorganized, but I'm saying there's a higher probability of success if you invest in something that is more organized and has a plan, a structured plan. So, right, exactly. So where are the cots going to be? Yeah, so they didn't do their due diligence, the investors.
So those are really good examples in terms of assessing your risk when you're looking at entering like a startup.
Yep.
So then how do you look at bonds versus stocks and those risks? Or did we already talk about that when I said that?
No. So stocks versus bonds. Anyone know which one's more risky and why? Stocks. Why?
Because they're variable. Bonds are pretty much fixed interest rate.
Yeah, pretty stable. Yeah, less volatile. Yeah. So typically risk is measured, one of the ways risk is measured is by volatility, right? Like how often does it go up and down, up and down? Bonds stay pretty relatively stable to the market. And so yes, that's a pretty low risk, low return type safer investment. Now you have different grades of bonds, right? Remember I said you have treasury bills, which are government bonds. Then you have corporate bonds, which are a little more, depending on who you are. Like it was a point where Apple's credit rating was higher than the government's, I think. So like Apple bonds were like less risky than the government, which was mind-boggling. But I think they fixed that now. But yeah, it was crazy. Like, so typically the government bonds are considered risk-free because they're only about 2%. Right? Then you start getting into corporate bonds, which yield closer to 4, 5, maybe 6%, depending on the company. Then there's something, you ever heard of junk bonds? Or junk bonds? Those are like bonds that are a little more, so those can yield up to 10, 20%, but they may not have stable cash flows to sustain all this debt. So you go, oh, I'll get 20%, and then they get hit a recession, and then they bankrupt, and now you are wiped clear. So it sounds good, but again, it's that risk versus reward. And then when we talk about stocks, there's large cap, mid cap, small cap, right? So your small caps would be the cannabis, and that just kind of came up, maybe I think under $100 million or something, or in assets or market cap. Then you have mid cap, which is like maybe like a Zynga would be a mid cap, like kind of like your.
What about like a Pinterest or Zoom?
Is Pinterest publicly traded?
Yep, just started.
Oh, interesting. IPOs.
A little bit, just today.
That's probably, depending on their market cap, probably mid cap. And then you think about your large caps like your GMs, your Fords, your Apples, your Googles, your Facebooks, Nikes, all the big large companies. Those are typically safer because they're usually not going to go bankrupt. Exactly. They're most likely not going to go bankrupt. Now their stocks may be volatile. They may have some news.
And they're often the most expensive stocks as well.
Correct. Right. Because you pay a premium for that safety. Right?
So like Google stock is like one shares around anywhere from 1,200 to 1,300, looking at market variability.
Yep. So typically that's kind of your profiles. Your risk profiles for different stocks and bonds. When you're talking to an investment manager or financial manager, you're going to want to understand, if they say, hey, I want to get you 75% stocks, your next question should be, okay, which types of stocks? Right? Because you don't want 75% all in like small cap stocks, because small caps have a higher chance of going bankrupt, all things being equal. And then also you don't want everything in junk bonds, because like I said, you can make a decent return, but they may not be liquid and they may not be able to come with the cash flow to pay their bills, and then if they don't pay their bills, it's going to bankruptcy and you get wiped out. No more bonds for you, and then your principal's gone, right? So it just sort of depends on your risk tolerance with that, risk profiles. Yes, please.
So like for Google, it's like you said, it's what, 1,200, 1,300. So doesn't everybody want that? Everybody wants Google. I get 1 or 2 shares. Is that what I should do? Because everybody knows Google's going to be doing well for forever? Or
maybe not really. There's a stat. What's the stat? I think it's 60% of the stocks that were the top 10 or top 100 stocks like 50 years ago are no longer even like around, or even, like think about Kodak, right? Kodak was Google 40 years ago, right? They were like IBM, right? You haven't heard much about IBM?
That's a great example.
IBM, so
I
were
mean, think about
huge.
in the 80s, everybody
Yeah,
had IBM.
right.
So
IBM
is
was
it worth
Apple.
it, though? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
So-
Like the ones that we know that are so popular, is it worth it to just spend $1,200 and get one share? Or how do you make that decision?
What I do for me personally, like if you look at my own portfolio, I research the companies. And then I try to figure out how diverse are the companies in terms of what they offer. Like, and what they're trying to offer, what industries are they offering. Google's about to get in healthcare and
Right.
aerospace.
Like
So,
they're like doing.
so when you look at things like that, or you look at like an Amazon, that's a great example. Amazon, if you think about it, when it first came out, I think they were just about books.
Yep.
Now think about everything that Amazon does. So if
But then there's about to be some government regulations, so you have to.
Right,
So that's-
right.
that's if you, how can I put this? If a company gets too big, okay, historically what has happened, even since the age of when the original Rockefeller was out, because he got involved with
He
this
started
shit.
this, yeah.
And I think Ford got involved with
Yep,
this,
yep.
and JP Morgan got involved with this.
And then the electricity companies.
Yeah, General Electric. So if a company gets too big, then the government's way of controlling that is to slap them with an antitrust lawsuit.
Boom.
So then they basically have to work with the government in terms of this lawsuit. It doesn't necessarily mean that the company is going to lose everything completely, because if you think of the names we just mentioned, them companies are still around, they're still doing just fine. But it's their way of the government trying to slow down the rapidity of their growth.
Yep.
So they want to bring them back a level. So it's like if someone, it's like if you have, from a medical standpoint, if you got like someone who's a really good surgeon, they decide they can do this surgery, they can do this surgery, they can do this surgery, but they haven't gotten like licensed to do none of that shit, and they haven't gone through a fellowship, and you say, hey, bro, wait, I need you to go do this additional training, or someone who goes to a conference and learns how to do all these procedures, and they're like, I can do these procedures. It's like, stop it. I need you to do this many procedures before we let you experiment on this person. It's the same concept. So it's not to say that investing in a high market cap company is a bad thing, but you have to look at what is the long-term trajectory of that company. And that's where, again, we kind of come back to this thing of risk that we haven't really learned. Where you're looking at, okay, so what's this company doing? What are they looking at? What are they investing in? What are their goals for this and this? And it gives you an idea. It might be beneficial for me to buy one share. It might be beneficial for me to buy 5. It might be beneficial to me to hold off until I feel like I'm in a more secure place financially before I choose to invest.
Yep.
See what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I have two things to add to that. The first thing is a real life anecdote about what happens when antitrust laws get slapped on companies. The second one is talking about ETFs and index funds.
Okay.
So the first point, antitrust lawsuits. The last time that anything this memorable happened was with Microsoft. And that was in the early 2000s, right around the tech bubble, 2001, 2000, around there. So Microsoft was getting humongous. They were like taking over everything, right? And what the government said, they said, okay, you guys are growing too fast. You're starting to look like a monopoly.
Right.
So look like monopoly. We don't want that, because you have monopolies, then they don't price competitively, so they can kind of just charge you whatever they want, and then the consumer has to pay for it. So, and the government doesn't really like that, right? So they slap you with the antitrust lawsuit. Now, as we know, Microsoft is still around, but what that antitrust lawsuit did, it slowed down the growth of Microsoft, because now your assets are tied up fighting this lawsuit. Right? You don't have the time, resources, and energy to go acquire a new company. 'Cause that's what they're doing, just acquiring a bunch of young startups, and they bought their way into like a monopoly. And so right around that time, if you notice, what started coming up, now that made room for the Apple. Right? That made room for the Amazon. Because now you have all these young startups, instead of getting gobbled up by corporations, they can grow organically
That's about
and
half
flourish.
Amazon, I feel like.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's what.
We would say maybe hold on on Amazon.
No, because Microsoft is still doing very well. They're still a great company. It's still, they're healthy.
Your growth
but-
is just less.
Yes.
Right,
It's
right.
It's less rapid.
Okay.
So it's
Right,
just,
right.
it slows down. So say they were growing by like, and I'm just making up numbers, I have no idea if this is
Right.
true. Say they're growing by like 10% every month, okay? Now, they might only be growing by 2% for the next couple of years. And then after they get through this antitrust lawsuit, then now they can pick back up. By that time, in the 2, 3 year, 5 year time period, there may be 10 other companies that come up that are doing better.
And now they can compete.
Does fall during that? So like Microsoft might be cheaper.
It kind of does. I mean, it depends on, it all depends, right? Because if their sales are impacted, it maybe, but so the price of a stock is dependent upon future cash flows, right? So when companies like, for example, when Amazon, remember Jeff Bezos when he smoked weed and the stock dropped like 9% the next day? Yeah. That was because investors felt like his leadership ability was detrimental to the future growth of Amazon. So therefore,
like Elon Musk.
I mean, that's what I meant. Elon Musk. That's what I meant. Yeah, Elon Musk. Yeah. So that's kind of how that operates. So yes, probably all things being equal, an antitrust lawsuit should depress the stock price a little bit because if you don't have assets to grow, that impacts your future growth and that inhibits future growth. So therefore, if stock prices are based on whether or not you can grow future cash flows, then in theory it should, right? But which brings me to my next point, investing in a basket of stocks, so you don't have to worry about any of that, right? So now you invest in a large cap ETF, right? A hungry man. You gonna eat your cornbread?
See, it's our icebreaker.
So there's a thing called index funds and ETFs, electronically traded funds, right? So what that is, that gives you like a huge combination of stocks. So you don't have to worry about whether or not Microsoft's doing well or not, because you're just investing in, you let them handle that, right? So you say, okay, I want a large cap ETF, which is I want the top biggest stocks that are stable, and I want to invest in that. And so there's a professional managing that, and for a small fee, and generally that tracks, how well they're doing. Then you can invest in, small cap ETFs, so you don't have to worry about individual stocks as much anymore. And so that's kind of like a thing of the past.
Financial advisor would do that for you?
No, so you can do it yourself. You can literally go on Robinhood and invest in a basket of stocks. That's why financial advisors are kind of going by the wayside, because now you can do all this yourself, and they're coming out with technology that's called, with an artificial intelligence that's going to just be like robo financial advisors, because it's not that hard. Tell me your risk profile, how much money do you want to earn, how old are you, what's your occupation, when do you want to retire, and they just slap your portfolio. It's not
you can do it
that hard.
You can do it at Schwab.
Mm-hmm. And so, and financial advisor, they come and tell you, I'll take 2% or 2.5% of what I make you, but it's like, bro, what are you making me? I can literally just go buy a basket of stocks right now for free on Robinhood, put $100,000, $200,000 in that, and just let it sit, and it's going to ride with the stock market. And now, as we discussed before, you guys probably want, 20% in bonds, 20 to 30% in bonds, 50 to 70% in like stocks, and then some alternatives, right? So, but you can buy ETFs and all that, and the more you ever heard of something called diversification? You ever heard of that? Diversify your portfolio, and and so what that means is, in theory, it doesn't always work out like that. If you have a bunch of different stocks that are uncorrelated, let's say you have an ETF that's based on large caps in America, you have an ETF that's based on mid caps in Europe, you have ETFs based on bonds, you have ETFs based on junk bonds, right? And so you buy all of those combinations, and so now you're like so diversified that your portfolio should be, track at 10 to 15% a year or something like that.
Right.
That's
so
kind of
that
how
even if you take a loss, you're
you're
so diverse in what you look to invest in.
Right.
You don't necessarily feel the brunt of that loss.
Correct.
So it's like if I lose money in Pinterest or Zoom, if I'm buying like the stock market, which is essentially like in ETF, so to speak, if I'm buying that, which is like a large cap, and I'm buying that every month, I don't really feel the loss from Zoom that I had because the market always goes up. If you look, since we've had the depression, the Great Depression in the 20s?
Yeah, 1938,
Okay,
28.
1938.
Yeah.
All right. So if you look at that, the market has always trended up. It's never gone down. So even if it goes down, it's never as low as it was back then. It's always moving up.
12% on 10 to 12%. That's the average stock market. So
What's the difference between the ETF and the mutual funds? Is that type of
mutual funds are, so ETFs are the new mutual funds.
Okay.
So mutual funds is the same thing as a basket of stocks, but now ETFs, they have computers doing it for you.
Okay.
So typically it's cheaper. Yeah, but it's the same thing pretty much. And now there are more. I mean, you can have ETFs on cannabis stocks. There's a lot of different things you can do. It's almost overwhelming now how many options you have. But you typically want to at least be comfortable to have a conversation with your financial advisor or whomever, or now the robo advisors, right, to know what you're putting your money into and your risk profile.
Or a conversation with yourself.
With yourself,
If you're just doing it yourself and you're looking at, okay, so this is what I want. So I want to retire at 55. I'm not going to retire at 55. But in theory, it sounds really cute. I'm going to retire at 55.
Yeah.
And so, okay, how much money would I need to retire at 55? Okay, how much money am I making right now? All right, so based off of that, where do I want any investments that I have in terms of excess cash that I have that I don't mind investing? What do I want to look at investing and putting into what?
Yep. And so that brings us to protection versus security.
Yes.
Right? And understanding the difference between that. And so I'll give you an example. If you hire security, right? You hire security, you're walking around, and all of a sudden, you give security, goes and gets a hot dog, and now you get beat up, right? They didn't protect you at all, right? And then, but if you have protection, which maybe it's a gun or a guard dog or something, that typically provides you with security. Right? And so a lot of financial advisors try to sell you, they try to sell you security, but what you really need is protection of your principal. And that's what you should be trying to focus on when you have these conversations, and not necessarily just security, right? Because you can have, this is a secure investment, this is but will it protect my principal? Is it going to provide me and give me protection? Because protection leads to security.
So how do you get the protection?
Diversification. Diversification, because if you think about, like, if Euro has a crisis, right, and their stock market goes all the way down and you're exposed, but then America's having a boom, in theory, their loss and this gain should offset to bounce out to your risk profile. So you're not overweight in one asset class or the other, which then leads us to rebalancing your portfolio. So once you define your risk profile, let's say the stock market does great, right? And so we're like this year's going record highs, and so now your stocks were at 75% of your portfolio, but now at the end of this year they're at 90%. But your risk profile says you only want to be at 75%. So when you rebalance every year, you should be thinking about, okay, let me sell 15% of these stocks off and rebalance my portfolio back to my original risk profile. Because it's doing great now, but what happens next year when we hit a recession and now you're 90% overweight in stocks? That's screwed. That's screwed. So that's understanding the protection versus security, and then where diversification plays into that and why it's important, right, to rebalance. Yeah. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Please ask questions.
I know it's but questions, like, I know this is a lot to take in.
Are there any podcasts that you would recommend?
I don't really listen to podcasts. I have books I can listen to, but
yeah, he only reads.
Well, that's fine.
I
think you mentioned something last time.
Yeah, a podcast from because it's tough because it's like I can advise you to go watch Kramer, but it's entertainment. It's not real. It's not providing your principal it's not protecting your principal. Right? It's just kind of.
Okay.
Really, the best thing you can do is understanding how to protect your principal and how to invest in a way that matches your risk profile, and understanding how risky. People say, I'm risky. I want to invest in half a portfolio in startups, but really, if they all go bust and you just lose half your net worth, how's that gonna make you feel? And people don't really like that. You know, when stuff hits the fan, it's not really like in 2008, everyone got kind of exposed. Everyone got exposed. If they're too risky, you get wiped out.
I'm trying to think of like one book that would be a good start.
I think the Gone Fishing.
Yeah,
Go
Gone
on Fishing portfolio. That's number
great.
one. The Gone Fishing portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
actually,
that's a great start. Gone Fishing portfolio. Yep. I don't know who the author is.
I can't remember. It reads very well.
Yeah.
And he has a great way of putting things very simply so that you understand what you're doing.
Yep. And that's really a book about protecting yourself and not get rich quick or let's make a lot of money. No, it's about how do I grow steadily, consistently over a long period of time. And that's kind of
Yes.
I think that's him. Yeah.
Yep, that is it. Alexander Green.
Yeah, because other books talk mostly about, either saving or, I don't know, because what is saving, right? Saving, like I told you before, you don't want to save all cash. Now you do want some liquidity, you do want things that, you want some cash, but you don't want to save all cash. You want that money working, because if it's not working, it's losing.
But you also don't want to do, when I think of like the older, like particularly the older women in my family, everything, 25% of what you make has to go into a saving account, and it just stays.
That's the worst thing you can do.
Or they have random wads of cash hidden throughout the house. Like, go in and get that out of that dresser there. What? I'm like, why do you have cash rolled up? But when you think about that, I think from a cultural perspective, most people of color, because you had so little, you got to a point where you held on very tightly to anything that you had because you were afraid of losing it. And so part of it is learning from a generational perspective that we are no longer continuing that generational financial trauma. Now it's about how do I make sure, in my case, my 8-year-old niece, like we talked about, can she go on a trip, like if she decides she's 16 or say she's 18 and she's finishing high school, she wants to take a year off, like, what is that child, Malia Obama, took a year off and it's like, oh, I'm just going to travel.
Travel from Spain,
Right. It's like, I have no one in my family who was able to do that, but part of that was because no one had any financial means to allow that experience to happen. So how do we make ourselves more sustainable from a wealth perspective so that we can do that? And this is one of those ways.
And remember what I told you earlier about, you don't have to sell stocks to do that. You can have a portfolio worth hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and you just borrow against that. And now you're not paying, you have no realization event, so you don't pay taxes. And now interest rates are so low, now you're paying 3-4% on a couple $100,000. Cool, that's fine. Right.
So how much do you keep like in your savings? Like what's your
you want, so the rule is typically 6 to 12 months. I think 12 is a little high. 6 to 9 months of your expenses, whatever lifestyle you live, to cover that just in case, right? And then you start dipping into your most liquid assets, which would be your bonds and your stocks and whatnot. Then it necessarily your house or whatever, right? So that's kind of 6 to 12 months of 9 months really of your expenses. But that can still be working too. That can still be in a money market account. It can still be making at least a little something, right? I wouldn't.
Which ones do you suggest? Which ones?
Like
I need to do that. Because for whatever reason, I like looking at it.
I mean, you can still, you can look at your portfolio too. Like if you ever, you would be able to be like, So there are a couple banks that will give you. So when I was working at Goldman Sachs, we had a program that allowed you to really do that. And what the larger institutions would do, they'd take your money, and you won't see this. They'd take your money overnight, which you have to be at least 25, 50 million. They take your money overnight, invest it overnight, and that earns 0.05% a day, but that adds up, right, on 20 million. and then it goes back to your account, but you never see it. Right? So it's called sweeping. Sweep the accounts and comes forward, right? And that's kind of what you know. And we can talk offline, but there are options that will give you and yield you the most, a higher percentage, you know, in interest than other things that are like basically risk free. It's on them. It comes back.
I just need like just 1 or 2.
A basic.
Flip soccer,
Yep.
put it in.
Yep.
Chase it's just sitting there.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I mean, chase.
And, is it at least in the savings and Chase?
That's one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I have too much money sitting in Chase, just sitting there.
Yeah.
I
And
got a lot of, you know, I put money
in cap.
away.
Yep.
You know, I got a lot of stocks and stuff, but like I want to take some of my savings
And at least put
out
it-
there and put
yeah.
it somewhere else, like just in what you're talking
In money
about.
market account. Yep. And we can talk offline about how to do that.
You guys have any other questions?
What's a money market account?
So a money market account is there's a no. That's a good question. That's a good question. I'll show you. You're not the only one. Not the only one. You're not the only one. So a money market account is like having a savings account, but like the banks take that money and pull it together with everything else and allow other banks to borrow on that money.
But what's the benefit to me if I do that?
So for every dollar you give them, they give you back like 5 cents.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you-
Or like really like 0.05 cents really.
How long you have to keep like money into those account? Like say for instance, you
Oh.
want to get it out. Like what do you?
Yeah, no, that's completely liquid. You can get it out that same day because really it's just pulled together. Now, as long as everybody don't get it out at the same time, but yeah, it's like it's swept overnight with a big pool. Your numbers don't change at all, and then you just kind of get it.
Does it
Yeah.
seem like you have to have a minimum amount to
For that, I mean, you.
Like
I mean, you. Yeah, it's a minute. Yes, and depending on how much you want to put in there.
On the bank too.
Yeah, I know like UBS and like Goldman, like there's a different type of tier than like a Chase or Bank of America. So
But
it just depends.
I would tell you also understand that in terms of the growth of that growth rate is going to be
Yeah,
slow.
it's like it's just better than nothing.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
better than
than
nothing.
a regular savings account?
Right.
Correct,
But
correct.
to give you an anecdote, my father passed away. My mother got some money from his life insurance policies. He happened to have multiple. So she decided to put a large sum of it in a money market account and was livid when there was no growth after a year. She was
Yeah,
just like, why did I put it here? Because she was looking for something that was a little bit more aggressive, but that wasn't explained well to her
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
So she ended up moving it to somewhere else, but that's what you have to understand. So you have to be willing to sit and wait for a long period, not just a year.
Yeah, and money market is just an option, just
Right.
it's better than nothing. I mean, really, if you have that, I would even say put it in T-bills because that's still liquid too. Put it in Treasury bonds, and you get a little more percent. Treasury bonds, like yeah. So you want to put it in something that's liquid,
Right.
you know, and typically the more liquid something. Do you know what liquidity is?
Explain liquidity.
Okay, so liquidity is the ability to trade your asset for cash quickly. Like for example, if I have $1 and I want to buy that cup, you know, I can buy it right now, and you get $1. It's pretty liquid, right? And if I have a house and you want to buy my house, it takes a long time because you got the paperwork and process. You just can't give a house over, right? So that's what can be considered illiquid, like a stock. So you have a stock, you have a Google stock, and I say I want Google. That's and there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people every day buying Google stock, right? Buying and selling. Now, if you have some obscure cannabis stock, there may be only 20 people a day, buying that. So therefore, it becomes illiquid. So you can't get your money out quick. So liquidity is measured on how fast you can get your money out. Something. Cash is the most liquid. Usually, real estate's like the most illiquid because it's harder to sell.
It's harder to move.
Yeah, move. Yeah.
And then the treasury bond?
It's like cash. It's just very liquid. So it's like cash, treasury bonds, corporate bonds, large cap stocks, kind of, and it goes almost in the order of the risk profiles.
Right. But understand, based off of kind of like what we were talking about earlier, those treasury bonds, that's only 2% in terms of your growth. So if you look at inflation, you're breaking even.
No different than the government bond, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Question in the back.
So I'm a financial advisor, And so much what you're saying is all new to me.
Yep.
How come our financial advisors aren't telling us like this? Because I think it's like little small idiosyncrasies that we don't know that big businesses do.
Yep.
Is it because they don't know, or because why aren't should we all know?
So there's a difference between a financial advisor and a wealth manager.
Okay.
And so a financial advisor, they're in the business of literally taking as much of your money as they can to invest it, and no matter if they win or lose, they get 2% or 1.5% every year. So their business is they're not trying to necessarily make you money. They're paid on how much money they can get from you. Right. So they kind of don't really care because you have 50,000 here, 100,000 here. It adds up eventually, but each individual account they don't really you don't have enough to make them pay attention to you. A wealth manager. At Goldman, we started at 25 million, but only if you are projected to make 50, like soon. So liquid 50 million in cash. Yeah. And so but they're incentivized, they on performance. So they have to take your money and they get paid on whether or not, they still get paid a lump sum, by taking your money, but they don't have 100 or 1,000 accounts that have 5 or 10, and they're trying to grow, and they make money when you make money. Because 5% on $100 million is way different than 5% on $50.
So basically, for us in the more middle range, there's nobody really for us in the middle range. That's what I'm kind of saying,
basically,
right? So we've all, to me, I've learned so much.
Sell, you can put your money in a trust. It's a lot you can do, but for this conversation, it's just kind of, I don't advise you to really sell unless you're rebalancing your portfolio, and if that's the case, then typically one asset did pretty well and you made a gain on that, and so cool, made a gain, great, but don't think about it that way because you probably made a loss somewhere else, right? So just keep it moving.
So do you guys feel like you have at least a better understanding, maybe a more comprehensive
understanding
of what risk is? Because we just figured, because he and I talked about it for a while, I was just like, we don't know what risk is, and we don't know what security is versus protection, because that's one of the reasons why you get a financial advisor the moment you come out, because you're just like, I need to make sure they protect what little bit I got, and it's just like, no, they don't really give a shit.
No, not until you make enough money where they do, right? Because if you make enough money where they can start making money when you make money, then that's financially advantageous for them. So I think JP Morgan private clients, it starts at like 1 or 2 million, and they take a little more individual, but I know Goldman, they were snobs, we started 50 million, 25 maybe for special occasions. so that was, and that's liquid. That's like, remember I told you liquid. That's not like you have a $50 million house. It's like you have $50 million in a stock market or in cash. Yeah. So.
You have a small briefcase underneath the bed.
Yeah. Any other questions about risk and risk tolerance and how to evaluate your own risk profile and what that means, or how you should be thinking about balancing your own portfolio, how many stocks you should have, how many bonds you should have. What percentage and everything?
I have a question. So, at what particular age, at what particular age do you think that, because, for me, I'm closer to the end of my retirement age. So, how much do you think I should have saved up by now, or invested, or going towards that person that's close to retirement?
So what people who don't look like us typically do, they start saving earlier, and not just saving, they start investing earlier, right? Because savings is nothing more than just putting money away to accrue interest for later gains, right? And I think last time I had the stat that if you invest $300 a month at an 11% interest rate, in 30 years you will have $1.32 million. So, if you're, let's say, you started saving $300 a month today, you're 35. By the time you're 65, we know the market moves about 10 to 12%. You should have just about over $1 million in a balanced portfolio that matches your risk profile, as long as you're getting that 11% year over year, on average. And sometimes it can be 30, it can be like 0, but like on average, that 11%. But that's only 300. That's $300 a month. That's consistently, because you're buying when it's good times and you're buying when it's bad times, right? You're buying both, because you're just consistently. I'm not thinking about it. $300. I'm not gonna go pop a bottle today. I'm just gonna put it there. That's me. But yeah, so to answer your question, it depends when you start saving and how much, and how consistently you're saving, right? Someone who's closer to retirement, you don't want to, your risk profile should not look like someone who's not close to retirement, right? It should definitely look like, you should have more bonds, because you have a vested interest to protect your principal a little bit more. You need a little more protection, right? Because, in 20, 30 years, in theory, there's another recession, a couple recessions, you want to be able to retire when there's not a recession, right? So wait it out. That's what happened. That's why you see so many like old people at Walmart, honestly. It's like they got hit right when the recession hit, and they were like, dang, I can't get my money out now because I don't have any money, right? But they rolled it out for 5, 6 years, 7 years later, and now they're like rolling in dough. So now it's fine, they can retire. But you just don't want to get caught in that cycle, And so that's kind of why you want to. That's the importance of shifting your risk profile when you get a little more seasoned.
Not me, I was asking.
But for like, you use that same logic and you think about those of us here who have kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you think about the age of those kids. So then think about what your child would have monetarily if every month you invested $300 for them, and had like 30 years later. So then they're our age or older, and they've got $1 million sitting that they have access to. And so when you think about it like that, it puts things in perspective, because then you're like, wait a minute, you could be 35 out here, just hanging out, not a care in the world.
And I told you, you don't have to sell that.
The thing with that is like I don't take a lot of risk with my kids' investments. Like I got UTMA 529, but like I'm not.
But say you are investing with that UTMA account, and say it's like every month.
Oh, it is.
Okay,
but it's not going to be a lot of cases of extremely low risk.
Right. So the market on average returns 10 to 12%, right? So about 11% is like, that's the number to hit 1.3 mil. So if you're hitting, even if you're investing, you should be at least getting 7% a year, right? 6, 7%, if it's low risk, because you can get bonds. I'm sure you have some stocks. So you should be hitting 6, 7%. So even if we're half that, right, you're still hitting 700,000, 600,000, something like that. If you invest $300 every month, 30 years.
So you're still going to have a lot
That's
for them,
substantial
because
amount.
you're doing it every month. It's like I do it every.
For whatever reason, I don't feel like the percentage percentage to get back on that from those accounts is that high.
Oh.
I think it's really low.
What is it?
I gotta look at it.
Okay, because that may be.
UTMA is pretty much an investment account. It's not really incurring a lot of
No interest or anything.
The 529, I know there is some, might be maybe 4 or 5%, but I didn't want to put that much in that because it's only for
college, right?
Right, exactly.
Car, anything else,
right.
And I want to have them to have money for that. But it's like when you talk about it with kids, like my apprehension of it is that I don't want to put too much money into something that's going to be risk. Like think we go to a crash and they, 1920, and they get money out for school.
Right.
That I don't want
to happen. Right. But then remember, I mentioned before, you can always borrow against that money. Right. So let's say even if they had $1 million or 1.2 million, we go into a crash, they lose 50% of that. Right. There's only $600,000 in that. You can still, you can still. You can still borrow against that. You can still borrow some of that money without touching that money, because it's going to go back up. When you invest in the stock market, you're investing in America. If America fails, then we're all screwed. We have bigger problems than worry about money. So that's the theory. But behind like long-term investing. Yes, there will be dips and downs. It may lose 20%, it may lose 30% one year, but guess what? It's going to gain 36% another year. And over the long run, as long as we keep producing and being who we are, like we will do well.
So you would advise putting some more money into like higher risk stuff?
I mean,
Investment?
I think putting money into like the stock market isn't. I wouldn't qualify that necessarily as like higher risk. I mean, well, it is a higher risk than like bonds, but it's a little more volatile. But I would advise to consistently put something in to something that can make you closer to 10% a year, which isn't easy. It's hard to make 10%, but like the stock market historically, 30, 40 years, 50 years, like it'll get you there.
I'll tell you, I've been making probably on my niece's UTMA account like anywhere from like 7 to 9%. Yeah. So part of it goes back to that whole concept of the diversification.
Yeah.
So it's putting it in something risky, is putting in something in the middle, and then putting it in something that's a low cap. And at the end of the day, it balances out. And the fact that you're doing it every month,
Yep.
you get that compounding.
Yeah.
That's what is making the money.
Mm-hmm.
And don't look at the number.
You just gotta put it away.
I don't look at it. I'm just like,
I
here.
looked like 6 months ago. I had that problem. And I was like, oh my God. Oh, it hurts so bad.
So, do you guys have any other questions? No?
Questions?
No? Well, thank you guys for coming out. We'll still be
Yeah, it's
around
fun.
here, so y'all don't have to rush and run away. It's okay.
Eat and drink. I'll get some wine.
Yes, right. And, also, I'll be sending out emails for the next event, which will be August 23rd. Okay?
Yep.
But I'll be sending out emails, and then in our Chicago group, I'll post it in the event. All right. Thanks, guys.
Cool.